Broadcasting on the internet airwaves from the great state of Minnesota, my name is Shaun, and you're listening to The Shaun Tabatt Show. Today, my special guest is Justin Holcomb, and we're going to discuss his and Lindsay's new book, God Made All of Me, a book to help children protect their bodies, which is published by our friends over at New Growth Press. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and happy to talk about a subject that many aren't sure how to talk about, but needs to happen.
Well, for the benefit of the listeners who have never encountered you before, give us a brief introduction to who you are, and then it's been a while since we talked, so I'd just be curious to get an update to what you've been doing over the summer.
Well, I'm a minister, and I live first I'm married to my wife, Lindsay, and we have two little girls, young girls who are 4 and 6. And a few years ago, we moved to Orlando, where we still are, and I serve as a minister and seminary professor. And my wife and I have been, over the summer, we did some traveling. Her family is in Brussels. They work for the State Department. So we got to go there for about 3 weeks or so and spend time with the grandparents in Brussels, which is not a bad way to spend the summer, and geared up for getting the good word out on the book. And we had a large campaign of bunch of pre-orders and just getting the word out. This is a book that we have written 3 together, and I've written or edited 12, either solo authored or edited or co-authored with my wife. But this is the book that we both are most proud of. We had no plans to ever write more than just one book, and then we never thought we'd be writing children's books. But then when we realized that we got to create a tool that we needed and that other parents and caregivers need, we got geared up for it and spent a lot of time just thinking through the best ways to get the word out on that.
Well, I can definitely see how this new book would relate to some of the earlier things that you and Lindsay have been working on. So I'd love to hear just a bit of the story. What prompted you to decide to write God Made All of Me?
Well, it came out because of the first 2 books. Lindsay and I wrote Rid of My Disgrace, which is a book about hope and healing for those who have suffered sexual abuse. And then the second book we wrote together is called Is It My Fault? And that is for hope and healing for those suffering domestic violence. And both of those books are for those who have already suffered, and we wanted to be a part of proclaiming and connecting the dots between the good news of the person and work of Jesus and his kingdom to the bad news of their experience of suffering at the hands of another and being sinned against in a very destructive and devastating way. And a lot of that work it's looking at the pain that has already been experienced and what does the good news have to say to and about that pain and what does hope and healing look like. And then we thought it would be wonderful if we could do something on the preventative side so people wouldn't need to encounter those books. And one of the best ways is to do what's called personal safety education. And that's just helping children learn about their bodies, appropriate touch, inappropriate touch, who are safe people. And that's what the book's all about. So one was a desire to be involved on the preventative side of things. The second is just really super practical, which is that, a few years ago, we were trying to have these conversations with our children who were 1 and 3. And there's not very much you can say to a 1-year-old, but our children were 1 and 3 at the time that we were thinking about the need for this book. And we were kind of taking the best of a few different books and kind of cobbling together our strategy of what parts would we bring up and how would we bring them up and what would that look like. So we would read a bunch of different books, and then we realized that it would be really helpful to have one place where all of the really good practical stuff was included, but also the theological foundation. Because there's a lot that you can get from the reality that God made everything and it was good, and God made people and called them very good, and then he made every single part of your body, the parts that are for sharing and the parts that are not for sharing, the private parts and the not private parts. And so having all of that together in one place was our goal. And so we partly did it because we needed it, and we thought that if we needed that, there'd probably be a lot of other parents and families that could use it.
Well, I can definitely see how this book will fill a gap. I think that a lot of us parents have been realizing as we're trying to have these important conversations with our children. What's the ideal age range that parents are going to want to share this book with their children?
We were shooting for 2 to 8-year-olds, and we know that's a wide range, but someone that we appreciate a lot, his name is John Tremaine. He's a college professor. He's also a medical doctor at Harvard Medical School, and he's taught and written a lot about child sexual development. He says that 2 to 8 is where you need to get a lot of the significant information and foundations for the other conversations. So you need to have a sense of that the child needs to develop in their sense of their body, their private parts, appropriate touch, inappropriate touch. That's a foundational age range. So we wrote it so it could be read to children who couldn't read yet, but we also wrote it so those who are learning how to read could start reading parts of the book to themselves. So our 6-year-old who is starting to read, she's reading most of the book to herself, and our 4-year-old is just listening to it. But 2 to 8 is the age range. We've heard that some who are older are reading this book with their parents also, because the parents realize, you know what, I haven't had this conversation, and let's go ahead and, worst case scenario is you're reading a book that's a little bit below their level, but it starts a good conversation. So we've heard that there have been some 10, 11, 12-year-olds who have been given this book to read to start the conversation.
From a statistical perspective, specifically statistics relating to childhood sexual abuse, how can you express that in a way that will tell parents just how important it is for them to be tackling this topic with their kids?
There's a few different sets of statistics that I want parents to hear. The first one is the prevalence, that 1 in 5 children will be abused sexually before their 18th birthday. And there are some more gut-wrenching numbers. Some say 1 in 3, 1 in 4. And 1 in 5, the most conservative we've found. And we went with that because we didn't want parents to get caught up on statistics and argue with us about numbers. I mean, it is prevalent and it's bad. So that's the first one, is that this is happening a lot more than many people think. The other one that parents really need to hear is that 34% of offenders are family members. That means a parent, a sibling, an aunt, uncle, grandparent, someone in the family. And that's what is so important for parents to hear and be aware of. 58% are acquaintances of the family or the child, a teacher, a youth pastor, a scout leader, a coach, a gymnastics coach, a soccer coach, whatever kind. What that means is that 93% of offenders are known to the family and child. So this whole idea that there's a bunch of creepy strangers hanging out waiting to do evil, that does happen, but that happens rarely. Most offenders need to have and already have access to children. And the last statistic is that the average offender has 125 victims. That's on average. That means that they are strategic, that they are very good at deceiving and building trust and grooming. So parents need to be equally as strategic, and they need to be more prepared and know the strategies that an offender would have so they can have a first line of defense. So the prevalence is 1 in 5. Who the offenders are, 93% are known to the child or family, and the 125 victims on average per offender means that they are effective and efficient at the evil that they try to do.
And I think a lot of parents are going to be surprised by the statistic that it's often somebody that's known to the children and known to the family that would be an abuser versus a stranger.
I get that, because it makes people feel a bit more sense of security that, hey, they're around safe people and they don't have a lot of access to strangers, and we have a good bubble of protection set up around them. And what that means is that parents need to be a little bit more attentive to who they're leaving their child alone with. Does their church have church or school or other organizations that deal with children that have time alone with them? Do they have policies and procedures in place for interaction with the children? And who are their babysitters? And what kind of conversations are you having with your child to help them protect their body?
And one of the things that I think is really key in the book is that you use terms like appropriate or inappropriate when referring to kinds of touch. I think in a lot of earlier books and films related to this topic, we've seen people talk about good or bad touches. Why did you decide to go with appropriate and inappropriate instead?
Yeah, you picked up on that, because that's important for parents to hear and caregivers. There's a few reasons why we did that. One is because we sent the book to experts and said, hey, whatever you think, let us know. And so we're wide open. And what we learned, and we knew this, but what we had reiterated to us very clearly is the importance of using inappropriate and appropriate touch for these reasons. One is if something does happen to a child, if a child is touched inappropriately, it can be really confusing that if the category they have is bad touch, they don't know how to nuance the fact that they didn't do anything wrong and that they aren't bad. Because if you give them the category of good touch, bad touch, when inappropriate touch happens that is called bad touch, they frequently will think that they did something wrong, that they were bad, and that they deserved it. So one is just to protect the hearts of a child that does have something like this happen to them. The other one is that it's confusing. It's a big word, inappropriate and appropriate touch. When you're writing a kid's book, you want to go for the most easily understood and accessible. So we were tempted just to go with good and bad. But the other one is that it's just, if something does happen, sometimes inappropriate touch actually feels good physiologically. And that can be really confusing. When I was younger, I was 10 or 11, I had an extended family member sin against me in the way that we describe in the book. And it is really confusing when something that is bad physiologically can feel good, or parts of it can feel good. So we just don't want to cause any confusion with the children. When you're doing personal safety education, protecting them from assuming that they've done something wrong, that they were deserving of this, that they were bad or they were dirty, is really important for the long-term health of the child spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Well, and another thing that I think is really unique and important in the book is that you're encouraging moms and dads to use proper names when referring to private body parts. Again, I think in earlier literature and in conversations, you haven't necessarily seen that emphasized. Why is that important, even for young children?
Well, that's gone over really well because we've had a few Christian bookstores not carry the book because it has the proper names for body parts. So that's been fascinating to experience. So yeah, many times, well, one is if you don't even talk about private parts and you ignore it, well, the children aren't ignoring it because it's part of their body and they might have questions. So ignoring the whole category of private parts is not helpful. Giving it a nickname can downplay the integrity and significance of that part of their body, and it makes a bigger deal out of it than many parents would want to. I mean, kids don't think it's abnormal. I mean, adults do, just because talking about private parts of children can be awkward or embarrassing, but children don't have that. That hasn't been made known to them yet. They don't feel shame or awkward about it for the most part. And giving it a nickname just treats that part of the body in a kind of dismissive, silly way. It's not a cupcake. It's not a wonky. It's not a willy. It's not a whatever. We've actually heard some parents have said that they have called it a no-no. I'm like, man, what does that send when you only, and I'm not saying don't use nicknames. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a playful nickname for a body part. I get that, but not the nicknames only. Give them the proper name. Those reasons are, one, just the integrity of the body and not making a weird deal out of a private part. The other is if something does happen, if someone does do inappropriate touch, they need to know what part of their body so they can actually be really clear to tell you. We've heard stories of 4- and 5-year-old children, because they've been told the proper names for their body parts, be able to say to their parents with a little bit of fear and shame, like, hey, I need to tell you something, Mom or Dad. So-and-so touched me. And they go, well, where did they touch you? They touched me here. And it's really helpful for the parents to know what happened. So for numerous reasons, both for acting like grown-ups and helping the child have a better sense of their body, but also if the child needs to be able to communicate, giving them the tool of the proper names is a very important step. And again, it's not proper names only. Because we emphasize the use of proper names doesn't mean, I know how it happens in a family. I know how families can sometimes be playful. And I think that's actually really good to not be so serious about private parts all the time that, again, you don't want to be flippant and just silly and never be serious. But I'm not saying that families should avoid anything like that at all. Just adding to it the proper names and the importance of the proper names is helpful to reiterate.
Well, I think another concern parents might have, especially when talking to younger children about these kind of topics, is that they're going to scare them about all the bad people out there in the world. Is there a way that parents can educate their children without making them fearful?
Yes, that is the key. The last thing we want to do is to give an unhealthy sense of fear to children, all that will do is build anxiety and an unhelpful type of fear. The best way to do it isn't to focus on watch out for people who are evil. Use the category of tricky. So when you're talking about the negative, hey, there are tricky people, and tricky people would want you to keep secrets from your mom and dad. Tricky people would try to look at or touch your private parts, or have you look at or touch their private parts. So sometimes there are tricky people, and tricky is a helpful category. But on the positive side, the way you do this without instilling fear on the positive side is by talking about, that God made everything and it was good, and isn't that wonderful? And that's what we do in the book. What did he make? He made all these things in the world, and he also made your body, and he made sharing parts like for high fives and smiles and hair, and he also made private parts, and your private parts are important for other things. By laying the foundation positively that God made your body is good, that's a better way to do it, and that private parts are not for sharing, and that you as a child should be protected, and only healthy and safe touch should happen to you. And if you feel like anyone's touched you and it's not healthy or safe, you need to let us know. And that opens up the lines of communication. That way you're saying mostly positive things. And once you've said all those positive things, you can then bring up inappropriate touch and tricky people in a way that doesn't start with and end with fear.
Once parents have introduced this book to their children, what are some of the practical steps or practical things that they can do to create an environment that's going to help to protect their children?
One is to keep on having the conversation, and I'm not saying every day at the dinner table, but whenever you think about it. And what happens is, just like when you're doing any type of education, it's not just a one and done kind of like, well, you got 2 + 2 = 4, and we'll never talk about that again. You build on those foundations. So one thing, broadly speaking, is to invite the communication from the child. Do you have any questions? Does that make sense? What do you think about that? Just getting them to talk about it. Another is, and we found with our girls, again, they're 4 and 6, we play a game called What If? And we just kind of give them scenarios. Hey, what if someone at school wanted you to keep a secret, and it was one of your friends? What would you do then? And we've actually realized that what if game is really helpful because it helps them think about how to apply the principles that we've told them about secrets and appropriate touch and inappropriate touch. And so that what if game is really helpful. And also to bring it up at the right times after our children have had a babysitter over. It's just normal for us to say, hey, was the babysitter nice? Yeah. Did they play with you and talk with you and do that, or did they stay on their phone texting their friends? No. They played and read and all kinds of stuff. Do you feel safe with them? Did they talk nicely to you? Yes. Did you feel comfortable with any touch? And they go, mm-hmm. So just keeping open lines of communication and making it normal for a child to be able to tell you if there's anything that took place that made them feel uncomfortable. And reinstilling some of the things about, I actually just play a game with my girls still, and I've played it for years. I tickle them until they say stop or no more or all done, and I quit immediately. I want to instill in them an expectation that when they say stop or no, that is supposed to happen, and they're expecting that to happen. And we also reinforce the whole idea of we don't keep secrets, we have surprises. And that's another thing about the fear. You don't just take away secrets, you give them the category of surprises. Surprises are good and happy, like balloons, flowers, and presents. Those are surprises. Secrets can be scary because you're not supposed to tell anyone, and reminding them that anyone who asks you to keep a secret is not being a good friend, and that you can always tell mom and dad anything, no matter what other people say. So going back to some of those practical things, it's a repetition thing. The best way to do this is not to have one talk about the birds and the bees and appropriate, inappropriate touch, and then you're done, kind of like, well, whew, got that done. But having a lot of smaller conversations. The purpose of the book is to start the smaller conversations that you can keep going and building on as you need to.
To build on the communication that you've been talking about with our children, if we're talking to our children and it comes out that they're talking about some things that have gone on and we suspect that our children might have been the victim of some sort of sexual abuse, what's the next step? How does a parent deal with that effectively?
Parents should report, not investigate. That's the thing I want parents to hear. Report what your child has said and what you may have thought or experienced. Don't investigate it. When you investigate, all you do is prepare the potential offending person to work on their defense and alibi, and they'll explain it away. Like we said earlier, the average offender has 125 victims. So when you have 125 victims, you're usually masterful at getting away with it. So they're smarter and more strategic on this front than most people. So report to the proper authorities. Police can get involved and start asking the questions, and you could contact a local sexual assault crisis center. My wife worked at one. She was a case manager, and her coworker was the child victims advocate. They would walk through step by step how things could be done and what the steps would look like. So the first person I would call if I heard anything would be a local sexual assault crisis center and ask for a children's advocate and just say, hey, this is what happened. This is what we're thinking about doing. What are the resources at our disposal before we do anything? Because that's the consultant who is free and there to help parents and caregivers protect and serve children. And then I would likely be calling the authorities to report and let them investigate.
Okay, that's helpful. Another thing that I think would be good for you to share, would like to hear about Grace and what kind of help does Grace offer to churches and families?
Grace is an organization, and I'm on the board for Grace. It's called Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments. And we exist to come alongside churches and ministries and schools and any Christian organization to help that organization and those who serve in those organizations recognize, report, and respond to and prevent child sexual abuse. So what does it look like, and how do you prevent against it? And if something does come to light, how do you serve the victims well? And so just doing trainings, doing awareness, working on sometimes investigations. Sometimes we've served as a third-party investigator where an organization that has had numerous reports of sexual abuse will actually hire us to investigate and then make public our findings. And we've done that with a few different groups. Just the reports are out there. We dedicated the book to Grace because we appreciate the ministry of Grace, but also because it's a book under the Grace umbrella. It's one of the tools that Grace has that's out there, and we were honored to be able to write a book for their curriculum and for their ministry. But that's what Grace does. You can find out more about it at netgrace.org, netgrace.org.
All right, and I'll be sure to include a link to Grace's website in the show notes. And Justin, if the listeners want to find out more about you and more about this book, where's the best place for them to go on the web?
Best place about the book is godmadeallofme.com. godmadeallofme.com. So just the title of the book.com. It has up there even more statistics. It has some of the endorsements. We had some experts on this issue chime in. We've had some theologians chime in to make sure that you can read all of those. And if you want more on information from me and my wife, justinholcomb.com, Justin, HOLCOMB, as in boy.com. That's where we have some articles, 9 ways to protect your child, 5 things to be aware of regarding sexual development. How should churches think through the application of law and gospel for victims and perpetrators, and some other things like that, along with some other just theology posts and other things that we've done. So those are the 2 ways to learn more about the book and my wife and I.
All right. Well, again, I'll include links in the show notes for your website as well. And it's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of our conversation today with Justin Holcomb, talking about God Made All of Me. If you want to connect with Justin on Twitter, you can find him there, where he goes by the handle @JustinHolcomb. And as he said, for more on the book, you can visit godmadeallofme.com. You can connect with Justin at justinholcomb.com, and you can also check out the publisher's website, which you'll be able to find at newgrowthpress.com. Justin, just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
It was a joy to be involved, and thanks for the great questions and getting the word out on this very important topic.
And that's all for this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can connect with me via email using show@shauntabatt.com. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, where I go by the Twitter handle @stabatt. And if you enjoy the show, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Until next time, this is your host, Shaun Tabatt, signing off.